Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Unlimited. Today, we are talking about insights from Change Making Feminist Founders. I think it is so important to get insights from other people, especially when they are doing things differently to the norm of doing things. When we are trying to disrupt harmful patterns, our society is full of ways of doing business that are really destructive. They're exploitive of ourselves, of others, of the planet, and we really need a new way of doing things. But it's hard to do something different when you don't have examples of what that looks like. I really had no idea what I was getting into when I started a business, not just in terms of the idea of business and business ownership and running a business, but also in terms of the online business world and the online coaching world. And there was so many things that I'm still recovering from, I would say, and that I've needed to unlearn that were limiting, that were destructive, that have been harmful. And so I wanted to talk about this, not just for me and, for those of you who are interested in starting a business or who maybe are running a business and realizing that the way you're doing business isn't working for you, isn't aligned with your values, but also for those of you who are consumers. Because while we know about the big bad actors out there, and there's certainly talk about the large corporations and things like that, there's also a lot of small businesses that are acting in ways that uphold these harmful structures. And so when you're someone who wants to participate in change and wants to invest your money and your energy into spaces that are really doing things differently, not just surface doing things differently, but truly working to change the way in which we function so that we can create a better world, we need to know what's going on. We need to understand ourselves in relation to these structures, and have some examples of how we can do things differently. So to talk about this, I invited my friend and colleague, Becky Mollenkamp, who is an accountability coach for business owners in growth mode who want to go after big goals without burning out or losing sight of their values. She is an intersectional feminist and conducts her coaching through that lens, i.e. acknowledging lived experience and never using blame or shame as tools. You can see why we resonate. And I invited her on to talk with me about her new podcast, which is all about uplifting the voices of feminist founders who are truly embodying in their work and in their business a more egalitarian structure versus the hierarchical and exploitive business structure. So some of the things we're going to be talking about are that hierarchical versus egalitarian business structure, exploring the term feminism, recognizing where you still need work and doing it, and collective work and enoughness. Becky's podcast actually comes out today with several episodes. So after you listen to this conversation, I encourage you to go check out that podcast, especially if you are an intersectional feminist, a womanist, or person who rejects such labels but is fighting for an equitable world, and you are running a business in particular. You're going to love this episode, and you're going to love her podcast as much as I loved this conversation. So now, without further ado, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Valerie Friedlander, certified life business alignment coach, and this is Unlimited. This podcast bridges the individual and the societal, scientific and spiritual, positive and negative, nerdy and no, there's just a lot of nerdy. Come on board and let's unlock a life that's as badass as you are. Welcome, Becky. I am so excited to have you on Unlimited. I have been a fan for a while and been friends for a little bit less time than that, but it's been such a pleasure knowing you and seeing kind of how you work and your journey and being in a book club with you and learning with you. And so I'm thrilled to have you on, especially as you embark upon sharing this new podcast with the world. So I can't wait to talk more about that. But before we dig in, I'd love for you to share in your own words a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. And the Mutual Love Fest, I've also been a fan and friend for a while. I'm an accountability coach. I work with feminist business owners or equity-centered business owners, depending on how they identify. And I work with people who are typically reaching a tipping point in their business where they're growing much beyond themselves, growing larger, where they have now a team and having what they usually think are time management issues, but what we discover are often actually values alignment issues and not caring for themselves as they grow, caring for their team in the way they'd like to. So my work is really about helping people get back in alignment with their values as they go through these more difficult growth periods and how to grow in a way that feels good and sustainable, self-honoring and honoring of their values.
I love that so much because obviously you and I have a lot of resonance and a lot of connection around that. So what got you into the work that you do?
It's been such a journey and an evolution. I could go back different points along the way. I've been coaching in some form for a little over a decade, and that's been an interesting journey. My background's actually journalism, which is why I'm really excited about the podcast because it combines my old self and my new self, the journalism and the coaching and the way I'm showing up now. But I made that shift out of writing and into coaching when my brother died in 2010 of a heroin overdose. And at the same time, I was getting divorced. And because of that, I was also struggling financially and had to move out of my house and like a whole host of things. So my world kind of crumbled in a very short period of time. And through that rebuilding process, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, I had to rebuild and rebirth myself. And really, it gave me that opportunity at 35 years old to explore, what do I actually want for my life? And I knew it wasn't what I had built, which was a life of shoulds, a quote unquote good girl life. I did all the right things, and it left me not happy. And so I had this opportunity to rebuild myself, discover what I really wanted in life. And I did all of that healing, grieving, growing work. And through that, really discovered I wanted to help other women feel more empowered about their lives. What was that going to be? I didn't know. I just knew that I had grown so much and learned so much about myself that I wanted to help other people, and hopefully in a way so that they didn't first have to have their lives fall apart, for them to actually shift out of the shoulds and into a life that felt good. It started with personal training, which now I look at and think, wow, what was I thinking? Because I've so checked out of diet culture, but I hadn't done that work then. So it started as personal training. That wasn't it. I discovered online business in like 2013, 2014, started to like realize, oh, there's this thing like a business coach. I'd never heard of, like, I didn't know that was a thing. So then I thought, well, I want to do that. Quickly realized I don't know enough about online business, and I haven't been successful enough at online business at that point. Who was I to be teaching people anything about that? Because also at that time, I didn't really understand the difference between consulting and coaching. And so then I was like moving into mindset coaching, because really that was most aligned with how I was showing up, because my work wasn't really about consulting. It was more about helping people understand themselves, their values, live a life that felt more true for them, to be authentic. So it really was more like quote unquote mindset work. I then got certified as a coach, also continued to do a lot of my own unlearning and exploration around issues around race, gender, all of the sort of isms and all of that unpacking, and got to a place of feeling really a lot of discomfort with the term mindset coach because of a lot of bad actors in that space.
Yep.
At the same time, also wasn't really loving life coach for the same reasons. And slowly through this journey, got to the place where I am now calling myself an accountability coach. Honestly, all the work's the same, because truly a coach is a coach is a coach. If you're a coach and you understand coaching principles and actually show up as a coach and not a consultant, you can really coach anyone around anything, because it's a skill and a practice and not about your experience and the things you know how to do, right? So I found myself in this place calling myself an accountability coach, but still I just have a lot of problems with the coaching industry as a whole, as I know you do as well.
Yep. I mean, our journey is very similar in that knowing all of these ways I've been in the world are not aligned. They're not based in my values and truly who I am. They're based in all the shoulds, and then getting to that place of like, okay, there's something different. Oh, this is the space. And then doing all this unlearning and awareness of the dynamics in the spaces that I occupy, that you occupy, and what does it look like to show up to real change and honor that voice inside and that wisdom that is so buried by all of this stuff. So I'm really excited about what you've put together in terms of the podcast. So I want to get to that and just say, this space of tapping into the wisdom of others and to community in various ways to help us hear ourselves and help us break free is so critical. And not in like that advice giving way, but in that expansive, seeing through windows, seeing other ways of being, other ways of doing, and then also having mirrors to ourselves to see ourselves more clearly and have that reflection, and how powerful that is. And it's one of the things I love about podcasts and doing a podcast is the conversations that come out of this and the insights that come out of this. So please share with us a little bit about this thing that you are birthing into the world.
Well, I'm super excited. It's called Feminist Founders, and it's a podcast interviewing feminist founders. And so they're long form discussions because I really want them to be conversational and not transactional. I want this to be about sharing knowledge and sharing experience with people. And more than anything, I want it to be about people feeling seen. It's birthed out of the fact that you and I and others that we know have been really trying to think about what does it look like to do business differently, to do business through this intersectional lens that we hold. But how do you run a feminist, an intersectional feminist, and anti-capitalist business in a capitalist world, and a racist world, and a sexist world? What does it look like to do business in this different way? And when you're trying to do that, especially in an online space, but I think in any business landscape that is constantly telling you that that's wrong, that that can't work, it can feel really isolating and lonely. You start to think like, maybe I am wrong here. Maybe they are right. Maybe there isn't a way to do business differently and still be successful, to still make enough money to, feed my family and put away some money for savings and all that, right? Maybe it's not possible. But it is possible. There are people doing it, and there are people at least endeavoring to make that change, even if they're not yet doing it perfectly. And I don't want us to all feel so alone in this, because I think that's one of the things that shuts you down. When you try to do it and you don't see other models of it, then you start to think it's not possible, and you kind of give up and think, well, I guess I have to do this predatory marketing, even if it doesn't feel good to me. I guess I have to be exorbitant in my pricing, even if I don't want to be and it doesn't feel good. And I want to show people that it is possible to do it differently, that there are models of people out there doing it differently and showing people how to do it differently. And so the podcast is a mix of founders who are just doing it differently, right? So talking about the ways that they are running their businesses that are through this lens. And again, the ways they're doing it great and the ways that they still have growth edges. And then talking to people who are more of the like educators around these issues, people who are teaching on the different aspects of business through a feminist lens. And I'm so excited to give voice to all of those people. And most importantly, to have the people who are listening feel seen and validated.
Yeah. It's so hard not to fall into that push of the kind of that Machiavellian approach of the ends justify the means. If you can help people, then it's okay that you did it in a really exploitive way. And energy matters. Like the way we approach something feeds what we end up creating in a very real way. Even the benefits that come out of it, it's still feeding into the system that creates the harm. Would you tell us a little bit about some of the people that you've talked to and some of the takeaways, kind of like a teaser for what we're going to hear when we listen to it?
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited about some of the guests. I'm excited about all the guests I'm having on, and I'll just talk about some of the early episodes since those will be the first ones people will be able to hear. C.V. Harquail, who maybe not everyone knows, but she's a PhD. She has studied feminist business in ways that most people haven't, has really thought about what does a feminist economy look like? Can capitalism and feminism coexist? And the answer, by the way, is no, they can't. But we have to figure out how to function within that until we can really overhaul the system entirely. But I mean, I think what she shared, and the reason it's the first episode, is because it's so foundational to so much of the rest that comes after, talking about what does it mean for something to be feminist. And it has to be transformational. It has to actually create change, have that kind of impact. It has to be collaborative. And that's a theme that comes up again and again in so many episodes in ways that for me were really exciting and eye-opening. I hadn't really thought about that piece around collaborative and all the ways that collaborative can show up in business, even when you're a business of one, and thinking about the impact you have and how we can work together, and thinking about collaborative, even like rest being collaborative, because one person can't rest if the whole team isn't being allowed to rest, or if that isn't something that we find acceptable, or if they don't have support in the home to be able to do that. Just thinking about collaborative. I love that as the first interview because it is so foundational and really helping set the stage for the understanding of what does it mean to think about feminist economies and feminist business. And then I talked to Toy Smith, and we talk a lot about capitalism and anti-capitalism, and Toy's so smart and really makes you think. And there were some questions in her episode that you have to really sit with, especially for white women. So for the white women that listen to this episode, I think you're going to get a lot. And like asking yourself, one of the big questions is like, what are you giving up? Mm-hmm. Having to really sit with, if I truly want to see change happen, what of the power and the privilege that I have, am I willing to cede? What am I willing to give up to make that difference? You know, from a business perspective, am I looking every month and saying, what sacrifice am I willing to make to say, I'm going to allocate some money to this? How am I going to use my money? It's easy for us to hold on to think, I don't have enough. But is that true? And to really ask, like, not just what am I willing to give, but what am I actually willing to sacrifice or to give up to create the change I want to see in the world? So like, those are some of the things that have been really powerful. And then the first organization I feature is called Motherful out of Ohio. They're actually a nonprofit because I want to showcase the full breadth of what business looks like. I don't want it to end up being just online coaches because that's what so many podcasts end up being. And I get it. But I also want to think about things differently. So I'm trying to have, people have brick and mortar, like they're doing in-person, for-profit, nonprofit, online, all of the ways business looks. So the first business we feature is Motherful in Ohio, and they're a nonprofit that help in their community, real people in person. And their ultimate goal is to create basically, I hate to use the word commune because that may not be exactly what they want, but a co-living environment for single mothers. It's all about how do we support single mothers, specifically, especially Black single mothers, but single mothers. How do we support, again, for that collaborative community approach? What does it look like to actually truly support mothers? And that includes in the way they run their business themselves. So we talk about the business and what they're delivering, but also looking inside of their business. How are they walking those values in their business? And it's all about, I loved what they talked about. It's about centering mothering. So they center mothering in every decision and every piece of their business, like, having kids there while they're having meetings and that not being a thing, and having rest and time off and, time for being with your kids. And in every decision, they think about how do we center mothering in this? What a way to flip everything on its head. So that's another super inspiring episode, and listening to, again, how people are actually putting these things that Toy and CV talk about, putting it into practice in an organizational structure.
I love that you engage multiple areas of business, because that is partly how we generate ideas, is not just thinking about our industry. And that's such that pyramid scheminess in the online coaching industry of I've done it this way, I'm going to teach you how to do it this way so that you can teach other people how to do it this way, and this dynamic. And to be able to be in a space where you're seeing connections in multiple areas, because we're all feeding into the same thing. That's the goal, is change. And even just what you said, I already found that very validating and inspiring, the idea of the collective, because it's something that the more I learn and the more work I do, the more I see how critical that collective component is. And I'm excited to hear more about how people take that in an individual entrepreneur way, but also how people have generated spaces for collective work, and especially in this over-individualized society.
Well, and historically, that is the key difference between patriarchal and matriarchal societies. Patriarchal societies are hierarchical and matriarchal societies are egalitarian. And that is that big shift. And so Motherful, they are really trying to show and walk that talk of what does a matriarchal society, a matriarchal organization look like. While they have founders and directors, they're actually even rethinking, what does it look like to have a board? They have, I can't remember exactly the name, but I think it's the matriarchal council. They have this council of folks that all have as much weight as their board of directors. And they're just really trying to ask themselves at every point, what does it look like to shift from that hierarchical view that we are so ingrained into, and think about, how does this look if we do this other way, and say we want to take this egalitarian and collective approach to our work?
I love that. So along those lines that you're talking about matriarchy and all of that, you've used the term feminism, and that's like a core piece in the title. And I would love for you to explore with me, like just a little bit about what it means to be feminist. And I know that there's a lot of talk about feminism from no, that's not anti-men, and like kind of that looking towards what the more patriarchal mentality around feminism has been. But feminism also has a lot of issues historically. And I've seen the term womanism as a shift in the way we think about it. So what is your approach and perspective and purpose within that idea of feminism?
Well, first, I want to say I love alliteration. It's one of my favorite things. It just feels good. And so Feminist Founders just works. It's short. It gets across the point. It's alliterative. I like it. Also, I have always identified as a feminist from my youngest years. I've been on my own journey with that, though, of course, to really learn in the last decade how white focused my feminism was, and how now I finally understand and am really trying to embody and practice an intersectional approach to feminism. And so I honor the fact and know the fact that feminist has been an exclusive and not always inclusive term. There have been many times where feminism has meant white women, right? It's really been very exclusive. And there is also a real effort among many Black feminists to say it doesn't have to be that. Feminism, when we take it through this intersectional lens, meaning that we look at all the intersections of our identities, not just being women, but all of the identities that are othered in the world, right? Meaning that they're not white men. When we can take that more comprehensive look, that's really what feminism should be about, right? That's what it is about. And so let's reclaim that. And so, I mean, I'm wearing my Black Feminist Taught Me shirt today. Like, there are many Black feminists who own that word and love that word, embrace it. And I also recognize that there are many Black women who don't feel embraced by that term, accepted or included in that term, and don't want to try to reclaim it. And so womanist is a term that has been brought on, adopted by many women of color, as specifically Black women, but many women of color, to say, we want to look at all women. So it's about all women, and that's our starting point, that the very term itself feels more inclusive of all women. I honor both, and I think either is great. First of all, Womanist Founders doesn't have the alliteration. Secondly, I also feel a bit like I don't want to be another white person co-opting a term that really wasn't about me to begin with. And so I didn't feel particularly comfortable using womanist. I think it's a beautiful thing. I love womanism. I don't know that it's my term to take on. Some people might argue that it's fine, and that's fine too. The whole point of the show and the whole point of the way I'm looking at that is basically it's that adage of, if it isn't intersectional, it isn't feminist. So when I talk about feminism, there's not going to be TERFs coming on the show and talking about their view on feminism. The basic starting point is that we have to believe in the humanity of all people, and also of the importance of saving our planet. Like, if we aren't on that term, like, this is a very much an bell hooks approach to feminism. You know, I would call bell hooks the goddess of my version of feminism, right? It is anti-white supremacist, anti-patriarchal, anti-capitalist. You know, when she talked about things, she would always talk about white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist. Like, that is the evils that we're fighting, and they are responsible for most of the problems. So I confront this head on with the podcast, because the first question I ask every guest is, tell me about your relationship with the word feminist. I want to put it right out there. I want to acknowledge that this is a word that has not always felt inclusive, that has been problematic, that has caused harm. And let's confront that head on. Let's talk about how you're showing up in the world and the lens that you're looking through, because I want to honor that for all my guests. I want them to know that I acknowledge that, and that I'm on a personal mission to try and say, I still love feminism. I still love the term, and I still want to preserve that as something that can be inclusive and honoring of all. But it's complicated.
I mean, I imagine that most of what you're engaging is complicated because there's a lot going on. I'm curious, like, as you mentioned, like, this is the first question that you ask your guests. What other questions do you ask that are like kind of across the board questions?
I start every episode there and I end every episode the same. Everything in between is its own journey. I do a lot of research on my guests. If you listen, you will see that I've done exhaustive research. That's my journalism background coming out. I love researching, cyber stalking people, learning everything I can. I always formulate a lot of questions. Sometimes we go off of that because I do want to keep it conversational, but I've done a lot of research. So the middle is really just all about them. But I end every episode by asking them to share a resource. And that's great because I'm learning all kinds of new books and podcasts and people to follow and learn from. I'm putting together a bookshop where everyone can go and find all of the resources that are shared. So there's going to be an easy place for you to go and find all of those. And then the last thing I ask everyone is to share a nonprofit or an organization that's doing good work in the world that they want people to know about so that I can make a donation as my way of thanking them for their time and encourage the listeners to also make a donation. In full transparency, I stole this idea from Mike Birbiglia, who's a comedian who has a podcast called Working It Out. I happen to like listening to comedian podcasts, and he does that at the end of every episode. And I've always loved that. To me, it feels like the perfect way to bring sort of that feminist perspective into the podcast as a way to say, I'm going to enrich an organization that's doing the work that's meaningful to you. And I'm hoping as a collective that we can do the same and make an impact.
Oh, that's beautiful. Since you do so much research on your guests, and I know that you've been really mindful about who you reach out to and what you're doing with this work, what has it been like to reach out to some of these people? There's a lot of stuff around reaching out to people who have been really successful. There's the, oh, who am I to, that sense of I'm not big enough to reach out to this person, or they're going to pay attention to me, or are they going to say yes? And overcoming that internally, but then also navigating the external piece of the logistics of reaching out to somebody and what they say and how that goes. What has that experience been like for you?
Well, first, I want to say everything about booking guests for the show has been really humbling because I've had to confront in myself the fact that my network remains wider than I would like it to be. And that despite now being, I feel like I'm really a solid decade deep into my own unlearning journey around all of these issues around race and sex and gender and, sexism and disability issues. I clearly have work still to do. And most people, when we actually get honest and look at our networks or, our community, it often looks a lot like us. And I'm on a journey to keep changing that, but I have to confront that as I'm looking for guests, because I think the biggest problem I see in the podcasting space, and I'll get to the piece about confidence in a second, but I just want to confront the fact that I think often the podcasting space, what we see is a lot of shows that all look like the host. The guests all look like the host because it's easy. It's easy to just dip into your own network and ask the people you know. But the problem when we do that, especially as people who have privileged identities, is that what we are doing is uplifting voices of other people with privileged identities. And that just continues to exacerbate that problem because it's just more privileged people highlighting and platforming more privileged people. Not to say that I have a giant platform, but I also was like, if I'm going to walk my talk with my values here, I'm going to have to reach out to people beyond the people I know. I can't just sit in the comfort of saying I'll only invite the people that are easy to ask. I'm going to have to make asks of people that I don't know. That can then also bring along its own issues around how are these people going to feel about that? Are they going to feel like I'm reaching out to them only because they're a person of color? And I don't want that, but I have to confront all of this discomfort in myself that, we often have as we're unlearning all of these things, trying to show up in a new way as white people. These are challenges that we have to face head on if we really want to make a difference. And so there's all of that discomfort that can be very humbling, and you have to do it. And so I did ask beyond people I know. And, like with Toy Smith, who I have followed for a long time, I've learned from a lot. I've purchased a few things from her, but I've been on her email list a very long time. I've replied to her on a couple of emails in the past. But, she has a much larger following than I do by tens of thousands. And so I emailed her and just said, this is a stretch ask, but I respect and admire you so much. And your voice is one that I would love to have on the show. Would you be willing to do it? And she said yes, because she loves a stretch ask. And I think also has at least, even if she doesn't recognize me, she could easily go into her email provider and see how long I've been on her list. She could clearly see I've been following her on social media more than just that day. I've been around, there's something there behind that. Right. And so that was helpful to be able to have in my learning journey, I've been following people long enough that they can see that. But there's also people that I didn't know. I asked the people that I had on, who do you know? That's another way to think about these things. It's not in your network, but now that you've established some trust with someone, who do they know? Because that brings along that trust factor. And that's responsible for several of the guests that I have coming on. And then there are the people that like Kelly Deals, who I'm thrilled to have had on and who also has tens of thousands of followers more than me. But she's somebody I've had mild interactions with over the years. So I think there's something to be said for like planting seeds now, talking to people now, because you never know when those things might later come into play. And I don't mean that just in the way of like, oh, it's going to benefit me, but in the way of like truly about that relationship building, like creating relationships. And I think that's the thing that makes it clear that like, hey, I'm not just tokenizing someone here. I've truly invested in learning from someone. I care, and I also hope that just my body of work, like my social media and the way I have shown up over a long stretch of time, that carries some weight with it as well, to say this is somebody who does care about these issues and isn't just like, oh, feminism's the flavor of the day, so I'm going to try and go into that.
Yeah, you actually have an intentional space. An intentional space is important. And I've had people reach out to me who were like, be on the podcast. And it was like, guys. And I looked at their podcast and I was like, why do you want me to be on? Like, have you looked at what I do? Are you looking at what you do? Like, I did my research to see that, is this an aligned opportunity? And very much wasn't. I'm like, why did you ask me? Like, what was the purpose in this? To be able to see that, does this fit? Is this an alignment? And it's not just about your number of followers.
Yeah. I also don't want this to just be about who has the most followers, because guess what? There are lots of people with tons of followers who are not really putting the actions behind their words. They're not actually walking the talk. I mean, you can look at what happened with Chief, and it's a huge billion-dollar company, and they've had fallout about whether they were really walking their talk around diversity and equity and inclusion issues. And so you can't just base it on that, right? So there's going to be lots of people I have on the show who don't have a lot of followers, but who are showing the ways that they're putting these things into action. And I love that it's people who have, some of them have larger companies, but a lot of people who are doing it as a solopreneur. How are you doing it in the little daily ways that you show up? The small changes around how are you communicating? How are you selling? How are you pricing? How are you balancing your life? Those things are huge and matter. And that can be somebody who has 500 followers or 20 followers, or who cares about followers. So I was trying to get that mix.
I love that you bring that up, because the push in so many spaces of like, well, it's only how many followers you have, and that's your worth, right? How much money you make, how many followers you have, that relates to your worth and your value in certain spaces, and how much that is absolutely awful. And it plays into what we're trying to push back against. But I would love for you to share a little bit about, how did you decide who to reach out to?
Yeah, because there's so much privilege inside of that, right?
Yeah.
I mapped out the issues that I was interested in talking about, and sort of the big picture things of like, I wanted to talk about capitalism. I wanted to talk about finances. I wanted to talk about mindset, and I use big air quotes. And I wanted to talk about rest. I had some key areas and started to look at who are the people I know that fit in those, and who would I love to have on that would fit into those ideas. And then also just thinking about, as I was reaching out to people, asking like, who are the people that that are walking their talk? And honestly, that's the harder part. It's easier to find people who are happy to talk about how to do things differently, but finding companies that are really trying to show up and do it differently, that was the bigger challenge, continues to be the bigger challenge. And that's a matter of my network. I know they're out there. And so, if anyone's listening, I would love to find, especially really want to find more Black product-based business owners, but people who are really walking their talk when it comes to all of these issues around what does it look like to run a business that truly honors humanity and planet, right? That's equity centered. So for me, it's been about like, what are the topics I want to talk about? I keep doing tons of research. I'm on LinkedIn like crazy, just like researching and typing feminist and all of the social media platforms and seeing who comes up and who runs businesses, reading every feminist publication and business publication, and keep just trying to find people. And then like, how do I slowly get them to notice me and trust me? The trust piece is big. So yeah, it's been a process of just like, what do I want to talk about? Who do I want to talk about? And then who actually will talk to me?
Yeah. So what is one takeaway that you've had so far in this ongoing process that you're carrying into the rest of the process and into your own life?
I mean, well, the biggest one for me has really truly been around the collective, but also things around rest, I think has been really big. Just looking at the ways that people are modeling that. Maybe the biggest, it's not new for me, but I think it is for a lot of people. And it's something that I bring into my work, but it has helped me think about even more emphasizing, which is enough. That's come up in multiple episodes because when we talk about anti-capitalism, we have to talk about enough. And I think going back to something you said at the beginning of this, the idea of like, what's this different way of showing up? It's not just about if we get more wealth into women's hands or more wealth into people of color's hands. And that is certainly, there is something to that argument. There's an argument to be made there, and I understand it. And I don't mean to diminish or demean that because I think it has its space. I will never say we shouldn't have women having more wealth or we shouldn't have people of color having more wealth. Absolutely. But is that in and of itself the answer? And I don't believe it is, because I think as long as we're perpetuating the same harms in accumulating that wealth, then we haven't changed anything. All we've done is change it from a hierarchical structure with white men at the top to a hierarchical structure with some other person identity at the top. But it remains a hierarchical structure that leaves many out and that favors a very few. And as long as we still have billionaires, we still have a problem. We haven't fixed the problem. And so I think for me, it's about enough. What's enough? In capitalism, it's always about more. How do I get mine? How do I build my empire? How do I get to 7 figures? No, that's not enough anymore. I got to get to 8 figures. Everything is in this like more, more, more. There's never going to be enough. So that we're all trying to get our piece of the pie. And we think that there's a limited pie. There's only a few pieces. So I got to get mine. And if I got to get mine, somebody else isn't going to get theirs. And that's just too bad. And so I think a big thing that's come up over and over again is having people, and I really hope people get confronted with and sit with, what is enough? What's enough? What's enough money? What's enough free time or work time? What's enough fun? What's enough rest? What's enough? Because we never ask ourselves that. What's enough? We're only asking ourselves, how do I get more of whatever those things are? Well, what's enough? And then how do I go about getting that? And then if I get so lucky as to have more, what can I do with it? That goes back to toys saying like, what are you willing to sacrifice? But if we don't ever think about our enough number, then we're always in the hunt for more. And there's never anything that we can then sacrifice, right? We can never give away because we aren't ever satisfied. So I don't know. I think maybe more than anything, that's the piece that I kind of hope, the thread that runs throughout and that people really get confronted with and have to sit with, especially those who have the most privilege.
Yep. I love that question. That idea of defining enough. It's so critical because more equals success is where we're crashing and burning really badly. And to know what enough is makes a huge difference. I love that. And I'm actually curious also, what question is this bubbling up for you as you do this work? Like what curiosity or question is coming up more for you?
Well, for me, it's all about my growth edges. So like I keep exploring, like, where do I still have learning to do? Where do I still have growth edges? And certainly one thing that I now know has come up multiple times in multiple episodes is I still have a lot of work to do around accessibility issues, around disability issues. That's an area where I hold so much privilege that I haven't done enough exploration around, and I want to continue to explore that. And there are others as well, but that's probably the biggest. And so I feel like that's the thing that as I'm doing this, it just gets me even more like there's even more that I can uncover and learn and grow. And in the past, years ago, that would have scared me. It might have shut me down because I was still very much caught up in this capitalist idea of like perfectionism, this white supremacist idea of perfectionism. And if I can't do it right, then why bother? And I know that holds a lot of people from really engaging with this kind of work and really going in. It's like, well, I'll never be able to get it all right. I can't do this right. So why even bother trying? But I do say, like, if you can continue in there and get in that discomfort of knowing you'll never get it right, knowing that you're going to mess up and fall down again and again, and that you just have to keep going, eventually the tides change, I think, because they did for me, where that goes from feeling awful, sickening of like, oh, I can never get this right. I'm always going to mess up, to being exciting.
It makes me think of the shedding of shame, because the work that you and I do is very much around releasing the shame so that you can hear yourself. And so I hear in that a lot of that shedding of shame allows us that room to feel expansive in the unknown rather than like it's dangerous.
Yeah. There's so much discomfort in it, as we see with our clients and in ourselves. Like, I'm no exception. I work with clients on a lot of these kinds of issues, and I'm a human who also deals with these kinds of issues, right? Around shame and everything else. And there's so much discomfort in confronting your shame and being with that and like finding the compassion to love yourself through the change and all of that. And it's easier to shut down. It's easier. And that's the choice a lot of times we make. And a lot of times I go into flight or freeze. But once you can start to learn how to be with your discomfort around shame or whatever, eventually there is this hope, because I have found it where on the other side of that, it goes from being scary to exciting. And that's wonderful.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. I like to wrap up interviews with 2 questions, one of which is, what does it mean to you to be unlimited?
Oh, that's a great question. What does it mean to me to be unlimited? Well, I like to think of it as being free from all of the restraints, external and internal, that hold me back from being my authentic self. And I can only control the internal, right? And I have done so much work to do that. And now I think because I have freed myself from a lot of those restraints, I still find them sometimes. I still find little pockets of that stuff internally that I have to keep excavating. But I think I've turned more of my attention to how can I be part of the dismantling of those external restraints that keep me from being able to be fully authentic, to be my true self in all ways at all times. Things like diet culture that very much still affect me as much as I've done a lot of work around them. So I think that's, for me, it's like getting rid of all the external and internal BS that says, no, you can't show up as your true self.
Yes. And when you want to tap into that unlimited feeling, what song do you listen to?
Oh God, I don't know. Can I just say a whole album? Like, I just like Lizzo. I love Lizzo, and I admire her so much as somebody who has done so much work to love herself. And I am still on that journey, and I'm doing better, but like, I'm still on the journey. And when I want to love myself, I put on Lizzo and I am like, that's right. Like, I do love myself. So like, all things Lizzo.
Yeah. Is there one song? So I have a playlist that I put together. So each guest, I add a song to the playlist so that if people want to tap into that unlimited feeling, they can listen to the playlist.
So hold on a second, because I know I'll get the name wrong. Special. That's the one.
Yeah.
Has anybody told you today that you're special? Oh, every time I listen to that song, I'm like, thank you, Lizzo. That's right. I am. Thank you. Like, I just need that reminder sometime. So that would be it.
I love it. Yes, that's such a great song, and I'm excited to add it to the playlist.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you so much, Becky. It has been a pleasure having you on. Would you please let everybody know when, where can they access this Feminist Founders podcast?
Anywhere, everywhere. September 13th is the big launch date, and I'll be releasing the first 3 episodes so that you can binge a little bit to get yourself ready and excited for the rest of the season. They'll run through December 13th, the season 1. Already working on season 2 because I love it so much and I'm so excited.
Also, if people would like to connect with you further, where can they find you?
Well, BeckyMollenkamp.com is my website, and you can go there to find out about the podcast. You can probably find all my socials on there, but all my socials, I'm Becky Mollenkamp too, so it's pretty easy. As long as you figure out how to spell it, and that will be right here.
Yes, fabulous. Well, will be links in the show notes here. So thank you again. It has been such a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I so appreciate you being here. If you got something out of today's episode, please share it. Leave me a review, take a screenshot, and post it on social with a shout out to me. Send it to a friend or, all of the above. Want to hang out more? Join me on Instagram. Or better yet, get on my mailing list to make sure you don't miss out on anything. And remember, your possibilities are as unlimited as you are. Allow yourself to shine, my friend. The world needs your light. See you next time.